Welcome to Doing Our Bit. I'm Adrian Smale, and today's video was prompted by a Zoom video presentation by Professor Steve Keen. He was one of the few economists to predict the financial crash of 2008 before it happened. This is a quote of his in regard to climate change, which might at first glance seem a little extreme, but when you look at this substance of what he is saying in regard to the standard models used by mainstream economists in the light of established climate science, you will understand why he says this. This graph shows the discrepancy, but why does this matter? Well, if you have investments, a pension, etc. like myself, consider the risk gap looking ahead 5 to 10 plus years. When I first heard this, I instantly shared it with my MP, but I also realised that a 1 hour 50-minute video is unlikely to be watched by many, so I've tried to present a much shorter edited version of his key points. But please check out the whole thing to see just how well researched this is. I'll play the excerpt now and then just highlight some of the talking points from the full presentation.
The question I really want to pose is, why haven't scientists been listened to on global warming? And the briefer answer is because of economists. Now, we all know that Don Lomborg is a well-known climate trivializer. What you maybe don't know, when he puts numbers into this stuff, he's using the work of economists like Nordhaus. This is actually an extract from a paper by Nordhaus. What's saying, look, that's 4 degrees of warming. And all the dots there are predictions by economists about the impact of climate change. And that predicts that 4 degrees of warming will cause less than a 5% fall in GDP. Nick Cohen is one of the first climate scientists I've worked with who realised, holy shit, this is why we haven't been listened to seriously. Okay. He said 3% is in exposed sectors, 10% in moderately, and 87% of the economy is in sectors that will be negligibly affected by climate change. And he then elaborates. For the bulk of the economy, manufacturing, mining, utilities, finance, wholesale and retail trade, and most service industries, it is difficult to find major direct impacts of the climate change over the next 50 to 75 years. You instantly know you're not dealing with a scientist here. Just a couple of years later, he did a revised version of this and said, underground mining. Now, that is a real give. That shows that he basically thinks a roof will protect you from climate change. That's what he means by carefully controlled environments, not exposed to the rain. That is just crazy, but that is where they're coming from. And this is Dietzel talking about a paper on the impact of losing the AMOC. And that paper, which says if we lose the Atlantic Meridional overturning circulation, that will boost global GDP. Why? Because it reverses part of the temperature increase caused by global warming. Integrated assessment models often assume that other climate variables scale with temperature. In other words, we assume if temperature gets better, then so will rainfall. Now, if you get a genuine scientist doing this work, and Tim Lenton is my favourite in this front, I'm sure a lot of people know the work of Tim Lenton. He did a GCM and applied it to the situation of a 2.5 degree increase in temperature with or without loss of the AMOC. And his conclusion was a 70% fall in the amount of land which would support basically the major grain crops. And he said that had a catastrophic impact. In a seminar where someone was talking about damage to machinery, and he was vociferous in saying, no, it's only damage to GDP. So they assume that climate change and global warming will damage the output of factories, but won't damage the factories themselves. So if you think that's crazy, you're right. We assume that any damage done to machinery is repaired in the same year as to which it happens. A conservative assumption that all climate-driven losses are fully repaired in the end of each year, and even better, miraculously, without any cost. This implies the impacts do not propagate beyond the year during which they occur. Now, I don't need to tell a scientist about the difference between a simplifying assumption and a fantasy. They think this is a simplifying assumption. It's a fantasy. The damages persist for decades, as we know from events like Katrina and so on. And 7 degrees increase in temperature. Asking the question shows you don't know what you're talking about, let alone answering it as they did. An increase in temperature would reduce global GDP by 20%. A 20% fall in GDP by the year 2220, 2 centuries away, translates into a 0.1% fall in the annual rate of economic growth. And that's the accuracy with which they measure economic growth today, and most of their estimates are below that level. So what they're saying is the impact of climate change on the economy will be unmeasurable. Now, if you know it for a scientist, you would probably know Zeman Ramanathan's paper, one of many, giving some sort of quantification and saying anything above 1.5 degrees is dangerous, 3 is catastrophic, 5 is potentially an extinction extinction level event. And these idiots think 7 degrees of warming will just reduce future GDP by 20%. But that translates as a ridiculously small reduction in the rate of economic growth. So here's Burke saying and talking about a 23% fall. And then this is the IPCC. And this is the real danger. The economists publish their chapter in the IPCC. The scientists publish their many chapters. Who do you think the politicians read? Who do you think their advisors read? They read the chapter written by the economists. This is the 2022 IPCC report. The 23%, that's the one from Burke and Co. that I showed a short while earlier. That's what the politicians' advisors go and read. They go back and tell the politician, oh, Jack, you're going to have to pretend you care about this stuff, but it's pretty trivial and it won't happen for at least 80 years. So Jack or Jill, whoever the politician is, goes and does hand-wringing stuff in front of the media and then does bugger all about it in terms of policy. These are the sorts of numbers you get. There's the biggest, Burke and Zhang. This one is the one that central banks tend to use. But most of them are below the level of resolution, so to speak, of estimates of GDP today.
What shocked me is that economists, when looking at the impacts of climate change, had their work peer-reviewed exclusively by other economists, not by scientists. This is clear from asking the dumb question about 7 degrees of warming, when 5 degrees is regarded in scientific circles as an extinction level event, i.e. 100% loss of the economy or GDP. The fact that Nordhaus received a Nobel Peace Prize for this work is appalling, given the impacts of climate change are a key driver of conflicts and wars. Looking at the loss to the economy over a standard 5-year political term, economists show a loss that is hardly measurable. Little wonder then that the response we see in political policy is so lame, particularly as they can receive significant donations from the fossil fuel industry for inaction. Professor Keen says we are in danger of a climate financial crash. In effect, when reality hits, where unlike the financial crash of 2008, we have no tools to solve it. We have already seen a taste of this in the US with, in May 2024, a report indicates that its disaster relief fund could experience a 1.3 billion shortfall by August and potentially over 6.8 billion in debt by September, with 2024 forecast to have a record-breaking storm season. I'm doing this video as it is clear this is far from common knowledge, even among people like me who are very climate focused. So I hope this is informative and will spur you also to engage with your MP so they too become aware of this. Interested as always in your views and any additional information you may have regarding this, so please add them in the comments below. Hope you found this video helpful, and if so, please like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you in the next one.